Hi, I'm Eric Siegel with ericstrains.com, and welcome to episode 12 of my video train blog series. This episode is going to be pretty short. I just want to share one thing with you. If you look behind me, you'll see I have 3 of the new MTH Genset switchers. I've got 2 of the CSX variety and 1 of the BNSF. Now that in itself is not that big of a deal, but what is special is that these switchers are not the high rail type that I would normally order. These are the scale wheel type, and that means that out of the box they're intended to run on 2-rail track, not 3-rail track. Now you may say, well, Eric, if you run a 3-rail layout, why in the world did you buy a 2-rail engine? Well, the reason is because I like the fixed pilots that are on the scale wheel versions. Now, in case you're wondering what a pilot is, this section right here on the engine is called the pilot. It's the steps and the coupler cut bar and the hoses. This whole area is called the pilot. And on a 3-rail model, let me show you real quick. Typically what you'll see is something like this, where the pilot is connected to the truck. That's not prototypical, but the reason they do that is so that the engine will be able to take the tighter turns that are typically associated with a 3-rail layout. But in certain situations, you can run an engine with fixed pilots on a 3-rail layout if you have curves that are wide enough to handle the fixed pilots. I have 063, 072, and 081 on my layout, so I can run small engines with fixed pilots like switchers. The Lionel Vision Genset switcher has fixed pilots, the Atlas MP15 DC switcher has fixed pilots, and the scale wheel version of the MTH Genset has fixed pilots. And so with these engines, I get the added realism of having fixed pilots on my 3-rail layout. Now, even though this switcher has the nice fixed pilots that I like, it's still, out of the box, a 2-rail engine. So how in the world do I make a 2-rail engine run on my 3-rail layout? Well, most MTH Premier Line engines that were made over the last 3 or 4 years have a feature that's called Protoscale 3.2. And what that means is that with a few modifications, their Premier Line engines will run on either 2-rail or 3-rail track. So to start those modifications, what I did was I popped the hood off, and then there's a switch right here, and out of the box it was set to 2-rail. And all I did was switch it to 3-rail, and then electronically this engine was now ready for 3-rail operation. But remember, out of the box this was meant for 2-rail operation, so there were no center pickup rollers for that 3rd rail. But MTH was kind enough to package 2 sets of rollers with the engine, so all I had to do was screw these rollers into the trucks, and now this fixed pilot switcher is now capable of running on 3-rail track, just like that. So now that I've got these scale-wheeled engines ready to run on 3-rail track, there are still 2 other challenges that I have to deal with. The first challenge is the scale wheels themselves. Now, in case you're not familiar with the term scale wheels or high rail wheels, let me show you what I'm talking about. I've got 2 wheel sets here to show you. This one here is a high rail wheel set, and this one here is a scale wheel set. Now, the high rail wheels are what you typically see on 3-rail O-scale trains today. They have sort of a beveled surface and then this big flange around the outside. And it's that flange that makes these wheels very forgiving. They keep the engines and the cars on the track and prevent derailments, especially when going through 3-rail switches. Now, the scale wheel set looks much nicer, but it has a much smaller flange, and that's fine for 2-rail operation, but in 3-rail operation, this small flange can make the wheel set more susceptible to derailing when it goes through a 3-rail switch. And so for that reason, most 3-railers use high rail wheels. And in fact, the whole reason that they have these big flanges is because back in the day when O-gauge trains were toys for kids, when Billy would get his train for Christmas, instead of having the train fly off the track because of small flanges, the big flanges would keep the train on the track at high speeds, and Billy would be happy with his train and he wouldn't have a broken train set on his hands after 10 minutes. So the high rail wheels are much more suitable for 3-rail operation. Now the problem, as I said, is that this engine still has these scale wheels. Well, the fix for that is relatively easy. MTH makes a kit that allows you to swap out the scale wheels for high rail wheels. The kit costs about $30, and as soon as it arrives, I already ordered it, when it arrives I will undo a few screws, take out the scale wheels, and pop back in the high rail wheels, and then these engines will run much better on my 3-rail track. The other challenge that these engines present is the couplers. These are scale couplers, and as you can see, they look really nice. Now, when I got the engine out of the box, it didn't have any couplers with it. It didn't come with couplers, and that's typical for 2-rail models. You know, in 3-rail, we're kind of spoiled. We always get a coupler with the engine or with the car, but it's not that way in 2-rail. You're expected to install your own couplers. And so when I got this, it had no couplers. I had to buy these couplers. These are KD O-scale couplers. These are the metal kind. And with a couple of screws, I installed a coupler on each end. And as you can see, they look really nice. But the problem is that most of my rolling stock uses the 3-rail couplers. So the solution to that is to use a transition car. I've already converted a good number of my cars to scale couplers, and I've made a couple cars that I call transition cars, and those cars have a scale coupler on one end and a 3-rail coupler on the other, and that way the engine will couple to the transition car, and then on the other end it'll couple to the other cars that are using the 3-rail couplers. Now in the future, hopefully I'll convert more of my cars to scale couplers, and then it won't be that much of an issue, but for right now I'm going to have to use the transition cars with these engines. Now keep in mind that all of the stuff that I've just talked about, like the scale coupler and the fixed pilots, that kind of stuff only works in 3-rail if you've got the wide curves to support it. If you're running 036 or 054, this kind of stuff is probably not a good idea because you're just not going to get good results. But if you've got big wide curves like I do, go ahead and feel free to give it a try. You might end up liking it. That's about all I wanted to say for now. I will be doing a full review of these engines in the near future, so keep an eye out for that. The next review I have coming out will be for the Lionel Vision Line 700E Hudson, but after that I'll be doing a review of these engines. Now if you want my 10-second quick review on this, if you want to compare this to the Lionel genset, there is no comparison. The Lionel genset is way cooler, but the Lionel genset is an $800 engine. This is a $400 engine. So this is a good engine for the money, but it just doesn't have all the features that the Lionel genset has. But it's typical MTH. It's a great engine, sounds great, looks great, runs great. If you have other MTH engines in your collection, you can expect a similar performance out of this. But keep an eye out for that full review in the near future. Anyway, that about does it for this blog episode. I'm Eric Siegel, and I'll see you next time.